Hi, when we work with a pivot table, we are actually working with the source data. The source data can be of two types, static data and dynamic data. What do I really mean by static and dynamic data? Static means the data values in the range which we have selected for the pivot table will not be going to change anymore. We will be working with the same values of the data while filtering the pivot table or adding column rows in the pivot table. Dynamic data means the data values in the range which we have selected for the pivot table can be changed, or more rows can be added in the data range, or more columns can be added in the data range at runtime. Now, if our data is static in nature, I mean there will be no change in the values in the data range, then we don't need to bother. We can easily filter the pivot table, can add some columns or rows in the pivot table. But if data is dynamic in nature, it means there can be some changes in the values in the data range, or new columns or new rows can be added. In that case, we have two options, refresh and change data source. If our data is changing within our selected data range, then we can use refresh option to help pivot to know the changes. But if data is changed outside our selected data range, then we need to use second option of change data source so that the pivot understand our new range. Let us first understand the what is data range. In our case, the data range is selected from cell A1 to cell U9995, that is entire dotted boundary. For our convenience, we can understand that entire green area is a box for us, and we can move or change the look and feel of pivot table in the dotted boundary only. Let's see the second type of data, that is dynamic. Right now, the sum of the profit is showing 385.5474 for ID 1 5 times 0. Okay, now suppose if I change the value of profit in both the rows 4 and 5 to 100, then the sum of profit should be 200. Now go back to pivot table and filter it for ID 1 5 times 0. Still, the sum of the profit is 385.5474. It is not changed or refreshed as per we have made the changes. Now do the refresh. After refreshing, now the sum of the profit is changed to 200. It means refresh button matters. I am taking another example. If I add one more row in the sales data at row number 9996, which is beyond our data range, if I give it order ID CA 4 times 0, now you can see in the pivot table, my new order ID is not reflecting. That is, do refresh. After refreshing, the order ID is still not reflecting because we are working with the old data range. That is this dotted boundary. Hence, pivot table is not recognizing this new row 9996, which is not in our data range. Let's go to the change data source option and inform pivot table for the new row 9996 by changing the range. Now you can see the new row is reflecting in the pivot table. Let's try to add a new column just before the last column U. Suppose I name it test. Now again go to the pivot table. The new column still not reflecting between the columns. As soon as we do refresh, the new columns start reflecting in pivot table fields. It means whenever we are adding a new column specifically in our data range or dotted boundary, pivot table or Excel easily recognize it. Now we will remove this newly added column and refresh the pivot table again. The added column has gone. If we add the new column after the last column U, I name it test2 and do the refresh again. This time you can see that after the refreshing also, the new added column is not reflecting because we have added this new column beyond our data range or dotted boundary. Hence, pivot table or Excel cannot recognize it. To resolve this, go to the change data source option and inform the pivot table for the new column by changing the range. Now the test2 column reflecting. They are the two ways by which we can inform pivot table or Excel to dynamically recognize our added rows and columns if we are adding beyond our data range or dotted boundary. First method is to update the data source and inform pivot table. And second method is by making our data range as a table, which we will see in the next lecture. Thank you.